Section 10 of the Purple Sapphire and Other Posthumous Papers by Christopher Blayre. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Cheetah-Girl, Part 2. The manuscript of Paul Barrowdale. This must be written. Some day a man may want to marry Unica, and he must know. I am sorry for him, whoever he may be, but he must know. With an introduction setting forth the physiological researches which have led me to the terrible position of affairs here recorded, I will set down the facts in narrative form. The study of the physiological phenomena of gestation and reproduction, and the evolution of genera and species has occupied my mind almost exclusively during the whole of my career. Closely connected with this question are the remarkable experiments and their results upon the artificial fertilization of parthenogenetic, or, to use Lancaster's preferable, impaternate eggs, carried out by Jacques Loeb, Bataillon, Deslage, and others. The outcome of their researches has seemed to prove incontestably that the function of the male spermatozoon in the fertilization of the female ovum is, in the first place, purely mechanical. They have fertilized and brought up to a pronounced stage of development the larvae, and even to relative maturity, parthenogenetic, impaternate eggs of echinoderms and batrachians, by means of artificial stimuli, such as hypertonic solutions, pricking with a fine needle, brushing with camel hair brushes, to cite in a generalized form only a few of the methods employed in the laboratories of science. Those who would know more of this are referred to the many papers published on the subject in scientific journals, and of late in the textbooks. We start, therefore, from the conclusion that the action of the spermatozoon is primarily mechanical. It merely perforates and excites the ovum and sets it going, so to speak, and may therefore be replaced by artificial and mechanical means. This being so, we may turn to the theory which deeply occupied the mind of Alphonse Milne Edwards during the later years of his life. The question arises, why should there be any limits to the possibility of miscegenation? We know that, within a genus, allied species can breed together, as for example a horse with a donkey, a tiger with a jaguar, a fox with a dog. Instances might be largely multiplied. But genera cannot breed with genera, as, for example, a dog with a cat, a horse with a hyena, or an elephant with a rhinoceros. To carry it to the highest point, a man with a mare, a woman with a dog. Why not? If the action of the male spermatozoon is mainly mechanical, why not? This was the problem which occupied the mind of Milne Edwards, and he discussed it with Ray Lancaster shortly before his death. And Lancaster has recorded his impressions of the discussion in one of his later volumes of collected scientific essays. I will transcribe here his account of the matter. He says, He, Milne Edwards, held it to be probable, as many physiologists would agree, that the fertilization of the egg of one species by the sperm of another, even a remotely related one, is ultimately prevented by a chemical incompatibility. Chemical in the sense that the highly complex molecular constitution of such bodies as the antitoxins and serums with which physiologists are beginning to deal is chemical, and that all other and secondary obstacles to fertilization can be overcome or evaded in the course of experiment. He proposed to inject one species with serums extracted from the other, in such a way as seemed most likely to bring the chemical state of their reproductive elements into harmony, that is to say, into a condition in which they should not be actively antagonistic, but admit of fusion and union. He proposed, by the exchange of living and highly organized fluids, by means of injection or transfusion, between a male and a female of separate species, to assimilate the chemical constitution of one to that of the other, and thus probably so to affect their reproductive elements that the one tolerate and fertilize the other. In this case, observe that the influence of the male spermatozoon would be more than merely mechanical. The male would transmit his physical characteristics to the zygote, the embrothus called into existence. When the sea urchins, echinus eggs, to which I have referred above, are pierced, as is done in laboratory experiments, by the sperm filaments of feather star, Comatula, introduced for the purpose in another series of experiments, the sperm filaments pierce the egg coat but contribute no substance to the embryo into which the egg develops. They merely stimulate it and set changes going. But if physiological technique could be perfected to such a point as to harmonize the fluids of the feather star with those of the sea urchin, we should, or might, get a hybrid between Comacula and Echinus. To adumbrate is at once an ultimate result to be aimed at. How often we find a splendid young woman married to a physically perfect young man, keenly anxious to have babies and carrying out to the full their privileges towards that end, but they remain childless. It is clear that their serums are toxic to one another. The man has a passing affair with a servant girl or shop assistant, and she immediately has a baby. The woman gives herself sporadically to a lover and immediately conceives. They have found their natural affinity. There is, in my opinion, a great future in store for the bold surgeon or physiologist who will rectify matters in these sterile marriages by bringing the husband and wife into a condition of mutual equilibrium by injection, inoculation, or transfusion, as suggested by Milne Edwards. How is this to be done, and how are the facts to be established? The answer comes to us from the physiologist's laboratory, and from the clinic. How often one reads in the newspapers, and even in novels, of devoted friends who have offered themselves when a comrade is suffering from severe hemorrhage, and in other circumstances, for transfusion of blood. Sometimes we are told that, in spite of the heroism of the friend, the patient has died. In 9 cases out of 10, it is, or was, because of that heroic gift of the friend. The patient has been killed, as surely as if the operating surgeon had blown out his brains. The war hospitals of 1914 to 1918 afforded us first examples, then experiments, and at last lessons, which once learned have abolished the grave danger attending transfusion of blood from one human being to another. It has been established that in this matter the human subject is divided into 4 classes, between which phenomena are varied. If a drop of blood from the donor and recipient are mixed upon a microscope slide, the corpuscles either swim about freely together in the mixed serum, in which case the operation may be safely performed, or hemolysis, agglutination, takes place. The corpuscles clot together, and we know that, if the operation is proceeded with, the recipient will be almost immediately killed. Before the dawn of this knowledge, how many patients may have fallen victims to the heroism of a toxic friend? To make this matter clearer, if you are not already familiar with it, I will reproduce here the diagram from Back and Edwards' textbook of surgery, page 79. In the case marked plus, agglutination takes place. In the cases marked O, no agglutination takes place. Thus it will be seen that the blood of group 4 may safely be given to any recipient. They are the universal donors. The serum of group 1 does not agglutinate when mixed with that of any of the others. They are the universal recipients. But give the blood, say, of group 3 to a patient of group 2, and you will kill the patient. In the case of the sterile marriages, a simple blood test of this kind will establish the facts upon which the surgeon may safely proceed. You will wonder, whoever you are, who is destined to read this manuscript, why I have delayed my narrative by this long scientific introduction. It is in the nature of an apologia, in the classical sense of the word, for what follows. As a young man, and beyond that time, I made many experiments to prove the truth of this theory, many of which were entirely successful. I produced hybrids between widely separated genera, which often shocked even myself. I did not dare to publish my researches to the world. The time was not ripe. The scientific outlook was not yet sufficiently broad. Negligent as I was, almost to the point of fearlessness, of public opinion, I shrank from the howls of ignorant rage which would have greeted the publication of my results. The anti-vivisection mania was at its height. Foul libels upon the earnest works at physiological research found ready publication in the press, and it was tacitly understood among physiologists that our experiments must for the most part be kept to ourselves. University authorities looked ever with an anxious eye upon the biological laboratories, ever anticipating the eruption of some sensational scandal or subversive theory. which would rouse a storm of ill-informed invective against the scientific teachings of the universities. But in my private laboratory, which became a veritable zoological garden, I never relaxed my efforts. You will not be surprised, even though you be shocked at what I am going to say next. I looked forward, as the crowning experiment of my career, to the production of a hybrid between one of the higher forms of the animal world and man. You must realize my position. The sexual union of human beings and animals is, no doubt properly, shuddered at, as perhaps the foulest form of unnatural crime. It figures in our books of jurisprudence under the name of bestiality, a felony punishable until comparatively recent years with death, and actually with penal servitude for life. How could a man in my position put himself into the power of a man who would tend himself to so filthy an experiment? The widely varying forms of sodomy were looked upon as aberrations, but were nonetheless punished by long terms of imprisonment. But bestiality was regarded as an even lower and more revolting form of vice. The accomplice would necessarily be of the lowest order of criminal, and one might have laid himself open to everlasting blackmail. The suggestion is obvious that I might have been an active participator in the experiment. I will only say that my whole soul revolted from the idea with shuddering disgust, and I should, to put it on no higher grounds, have been physically impotent in approaching the subject from a personal point of view. I read the horrible treatise on the subject of Dubois de Sotte, published in 1705, and my gorge rose at the long catalogue of horrors he had resuscitated from the morgue of forgotten criminal records. Bestiality as a crime dates from the highest antiquity. In the more outspoken early editions of our Bible it is indicated, haud in certa voce, as rife among the Jews both male and female, and the references to it in Exodus and Leviticus are explicit. In mythology it appears as a common ruse among gods, who appear to have found it easier to seduce the daughters of men metamorphosed as animals than clothed in their normal and godlike attributes. The legends of Phoebus and the lesbian Issa, of Pasiphae, of Leda, of Io, are prominent examples among the metamorphoses of Ovid. In the Middle Ages the devil is constantly taking the form of a goat for the purposes of sexual connection with reputed witches. The work of Boguet upon the sorcerers, 1607, teems with examples, and gives categoric instances of women who have been fecundated by dogs, whilst the laborious compilation of Dubois de Sotte runs to 450 pages of revolting record. The works of Voltaire bristle with instances on record of the resultant birth of the monsters. In India, sculptures on the temples of Shiva, especially at Orissa, represent continually the sexual conjugation of women with apes, dogs, and other animals. The criminal codes of Prussia, Germany, and the United States recognize the crime. That of Pope John XIII provided for its accommodation, but a fine of 250 livres. The historians Aelian and Athenaeus cite numerous instances as a mere matter of record, and as lately as 1882, Lacassagne has produced a work, La criminalité chez les animaux. As active or passive agents, human beings form a long procession down the records of jurisprudence. And the work upon the subject of Tardieu is well known to pathologists, alienists, and jurists. As a rule, the crime was included under the general heading of sodomy, but the earlier jurists drew a sharp distinction, e.g. A. de la Guarie, who gives the definition sodomia, i.e. cum personae e jusdum sexus, e bestialitas, i.e. concubitus cum bestia. Bestiality as a deliberate inclination is classed by Krafft-Ebing with sadism, flagellation, exhibitionism, necrophilia, and homosexuality under the general heading of paresthesia. And the scientific attitude towards these aberrations may be summed up as follows. Too many different factors concur to produce races for it to be possible to unify, to codify human morality. Heredity, climate, education, social conditions, riches or poverty, each of these contributes a different factor. The human creature is not always master of his functions. His existence depends upon inimical or allied factors against which it is sometimes impossible for him to react. Therefore, in the face of the worst turpitudes of human nature, known to us as crime or vice, the scientist does not protest. He merely seeks for the causes and tabulates the effects. Undoubtedly, the dominating factor is heredity, and Tardieu goes even further than this in ascribing such aberrations to atavism, and we find the records of such factors in every corpus of legend and tradition from the golden ass of Apuleius down to the bestialities of the Arabian Nights, from the references of Nicolas de Venette to those of Montaigne and Balzac, of Armand Charpentier, and others. Among savage races we have the amazing records of Paul de Chaillu, dating from comparatively modern times, with loathsome romances of de Musset, Jamiani, bishops, and of other pornographers we have not to concern ourselves. This rapid historic review has seemed to be necessary as an indication of the lines along which this horrible subject may be pursued and studied, should it be required to do so. There have been many cases recorded of bestiality in which women have been the passive human participants. They, in fact, constitute the majority of recorded instances, obviously by reason of the fact that, in such cases, the reasoning human participant is not called upon for action. These are no less horrifying than the others, but it was clear that to find such a woman, one would have to ply a muck-rake among the ranks of the lowest, most abandoned, and depraved members of the prostitute class. One had heard of such things in the brothels of Paris, Berlin, and Naples. I shrank from the bare idea of encountering such creatures. I had experimented successfully in artificial fecundation with the lower animals, but when I considered the possibility of carrying this higher, I found myself confronted with the same insuperable feeling of horror and repulsion. But, nonetheless, theoretically, the thing became an idée fixe in my mind, an ultima ratio probably never destined to get beyond the theoretical stage. This brings me down to a moment, now 14 years ago, which in the success of achievement has cast a shadow over the whole of my remaining life. I had read so far in Barodel's manuscript, and at this point I sprang to my feet, overcome with a hideous nausea. I felt that I was fainting from sheer terror and apprehension. What was I going to read? I put down the manuscript, took a stiff dose of brandy, and walked out into the night air to think, to recover my senses, to overcome the horror that was gripping me. I had almost determined to read no further when a fearful thought crossed my mind. It will probably have crossed the reader's. I tried to put it from me in vain. It simply tortured me physically. But I knew I must read on. After an hour I returned home. I crept up to our bedroom. Unica was sleeping peacefully, her delicious smile just parting her perfect lips. I reassured myself for a moment, and then fell back again into my previous mood of terror and consternation. Whatever I was to read, I had brought it upon myself, and I went back to the damned manuscript. The manuscript continued. I used to get the animals which served me for my research work down at the docks, from the successors of the renowned Jamrach. They thought, and I did not undeceive them, that I was an agent of the Zoological Society. One day I visited my purveyor in answer to a note informing me that he had a remarkable splendid specimen of Felis jubata, the Indian hunting leopard or cheetah, an animal I had long desired to possess on account of its curious capacity for being domesticated and kept as a pet. It was a most beautiful beast, a male about a year old which had been bred in captivity and was already as docile and as responsive to caress as any ordinary cat. I bought him and made arrangements for his transfer to my house in the country, where I kept my creatures. The few colleagues who were admitted to a knowledge of my experiments called it my Island of Dr. Moreau, from the late H.G. Wells' dreadful book of that title. Not, however, that my work had anything even remotely in connection with the horrors suggested in that remarkable work. By the use of general and local anesthetics, my animals were never alarmed, or indeed conscious that they were what the anti-vivisectionists would call my martyrs to science. They were a very happy family, and, in point of fact, when they had spent their allotted time with me and had bred the desired hybrid, or failed to do so, in ease and comfort, I transferred them to Regent's Park. No animal ever died under my care or treatment, excepting from pneumonia or some disease incidental to our climate or to the artificial conditions of its existence. I was returning in the late afternoon up Ratcliffe Highway, speculating upon the motley crowd of seafaring folk of all nations that throng that historic thoroughfare, and the degraded types of harlot who ply their wretched trade among them, when one of these, giving my arm a gentle nip as she passed me, said in a half-whisper, "Do you want a naughty girl?" I looked at her as I shrugged her off. She was a finely made, bold-looking strumpet, younger in years, and it seemed to me of a higher racial type than the generality of the local consorority. Very fair, neatly though shabbily dressed, with large, wistful gray eyes, and teeth that were both clean and regular. Her appearance surprised me. My short scrutiny encouraged her, and she said rapidly,
"I'm the naughtiest girl in the highway, and I like old gentlemen. I'll do anything, show you anything you like. Don't you want to come with me? I'll astonish you."
"Go to the devil," I said brutally, "or I'll give you in charge."
"All right, governor," she replied. "I'm going. Au revoir, mon ami."
And before I could recover from my surprise at her accent, which was perfect, she flung herself on the rails in front of a rapidly approaching tramcar. Deeply shocked and responding to an irresistible instinct, I flung myself after her, caught her by one ankle, and jerked her free of the lines. The driver had applied his brakes, but the front wheels crushed her hat. It was the nearest thing possible. I hauled her onto the pavement, and immediately a dense crowd of loafers, seafarers, and streetwalkers collected round us. She had fainted. "Give us a little room," I said. "I am a doctor. Does anybody know anything about her?" "Know anything?" ejaculated a sailor. "Yes, we all know all there is to know, and that's too much. The dirty bitch."
"Oh, law!"
chimed in a loathsome and pustular female who had forced her way to the center of the crowd.
"The gent's in luck, ain't he? He's got menagerie Sal."
"Whatever she is," I replied hotly, "she can't be left here. Where does she live?" "Anywhere you like to take her," said another brute. "Here, get up, Sal," and he kicked her in the side. I sprang up and would have collared the beast, but, perhaps fortunately, the invariable and imperturbable policeman appeared among us, and the crowd fell back. What is she?" I asked the man in blue. "Oh, one of the worst, sir. About the worst, I reckon." The woman was coming round. "Here, get up, Sal," continued the constable, "and go home, if you got one, or I'll take you." "I am a doctor," I said quickly, and gave him my card. "Whatever she is, I can't leave her alone in this state. Help me to take her in here." There was an eating-house just where this occurrence had taken place, and, aided by the constable, I got the woman inside and sat her down in a corner box. The crowd dispersed. As they did so, a draggled harlot called out,
"The old gent's in for it, all right. Good luck to him."
And the strange sobriquet was bandied from foul mouth to foul mouth.
"Menagerie Sal, Menagerie Sal."
I sent for some brandy and sat, looking at her as she gradually recovered her self-possession without saying a word. At last she gave utterance to a short, hoarse laugh and said,
"What the hell did you do that for? You told me to go there, and I tried to. You don't want me. What did you stop me for?"
"True," I said, "I don't want you. But I couldn't let you kill yourself before my eyes. I'm a man, not a brute."
"All men are brutes,"
she said defiantly. There was a most extraordinary struggle of accents in her speak. She spoke the low Cockney vernacular with fluency and emphasis, but occasional words, intonations, seemed to jar against the vulgarity of the rest of it. "Not at all," I replied. "Myself, for instance. Now look here. I'll turn your own question on you. What did you do it for?"
"What's that to you?"
"It's a good deal. You're too young and healthy to want to die, however beastly your life may be. Whilst there's life, there's hope. You are worth saving."
"Saving? My God! Let me up and out of this. You're a bloody gospeller. That's what you are. You're going to talk about the temple of my body, and God and that. I ain't a temple. It's a cesspool, and there ain't no God. Let me go."
"I am not a gospeller, and I don't want to preach to you. But I am a doctor, and I want to know what it all means."
"It means that I'm down and out. I've stuck it long enough. You heard what they called me. Menagerie Sal."
She pronounced menagerie perfectly.
"I'm too low and down for any self-respecting whore to speak to. I can't get a lodging except in Chink's Dive, and I can't get a man unless he's a stranger in these parts. That's why I clawed you. Or right down the utter beast of a heathen."
"You're in a wildly hysterical state, that's evident. Now look here. I've saved your life, and you belong to me until I've done with you." The wretched creature turned on a professional smile. "Don't misunderstand me. I'm not going to have you, but I'm going to make you eat something. Hungry?"
"I don't know. I ought to be. I know I've been empty as a drum for 2 days. I wonder what you're getting at."
"Nothing in particular," I replied. "But you are going to have some food. We can't sit here and do nothing for the good of the house." I ordered some food, which arrived coarse but plain and good, and she ate sparingly, and with a strange refinement contrasting remarkably with her vocabulary. When she would eat no more, I lit a pipe and gave her a cigarette. She had calmed down. "Now look here," I said again. "Do you feel anything like gratitude to me for what I've done?"
"No, I don't," she replied. "But that doesn't matter. There are other ways. I'll do it when there's no interfering toff around."
"No, you won't. You are going to promise me not to do it again." She looked me straight in the face without speaking, her chin resting on her hand, puffing cigarette smoke quietly so as not to reach me. At last I said, "Well?" She replied,
"Shut up, I'm thinking."
"A penny for your thoughts."
"I'll take the penny. I want one. You couldn't make it a shilling, I suppose?"
I laid a sovereign on the table. "Will that help you out a bit?" I asked.
"Haven't seen one for years. Tar, governor."
And she deftly slipped the coin into her stocking and resumed her scrutiny of my face. "You haven't told me your thoughts, and I've paid," I suggested. And then I experienced the shock which Balaam must have felt when his ass addressed him. She took her cigarette from her lips and said quite slowly and without a trace of Cockney accent,
"You look like an intelligent man. I should say a scientist of sorts. Not many doctors are scientists down this way. How can you be such an idiot as to ask me to promise you not to do it again? Do you remember what that girl Wade in Little Dorrit said to the champion Ass Clinham?" By the way, I've often wondered if Dickens knew he was describing a lesbian. "You know, about people who are all the time coming to meet us from strange places along strange roads, and what they'll do to us, and we to them will all be done. Whether I do it again or not has nothing to do with me. It depends at the moment upon you, or rather upon the puny little part you happen to be playing in the inexorable progress of inevitable consequences."
I was dumbfounded. It was my turn to sit and gaze at her.
"This way and that, dividing the swift mind."
And she, taking up my case from the table where I had laid it, took a new cigarette, lit it, said thank you, and resumed her position, her chin on her hands, looking at me. At last I said, "How in God's name have you come to this? You are too good."
"Oh, don't begin that. That's what the missioners to fallen women begin with. And don't bring in God, unless you feel the need of him for conversational emphasis or convenience, like Xerxes at the end of a rhyming alphabet."
"Let's put it on the lowest grounds, then. You are a woman of some education, evidently, and, permit me to say, of some refinement. You are too good for Ratcliffe Highway. If prostitution is your vocation in life, why not practice in the West End? Why not the Empire or the Alhambra?" The promenades at these places had not been closed in those days.
"Never mind when or where I started. That's none of your business. I came to grief on a P&O steamer. I'd had lots of men, some of the best, but coming home once from China, I fell madly in love with a Lascar, a common ship's hand, a bronze god. I wanted him, and I seduced him. It didn't take much doing. I had money then, but I was ashamed. I was capable of it then, to take him up west. I joined him down here. I used to go up west myself sometimes. No one here knew it, when I was just longing for love, real love, a woman."
"A woman?"
"Yes, for a real lover or mistress. Oh, don't look shocked. If you're a doctor, you know women can love a woman better than any man on earth."
"Then, among other things, you are a—"
"Lesbian. Don't be afraid to say it."
"But I don't understand how you—"
"It's easy enough. Men don't hear of the brothels where women can have anything they want and can pay for, from a vicious flapper of 15 to an insatiable Messalina of 50. The only difference between those and the others is that all the staff are amateurs, some shop girls and clerks, but mostly gentlewomen. You've never heard of number 100 Canterbury Square, have you? No, it's kept pretty quiet, but I didn't go there. I preferred to find my own romances."
"Romances?"
"Yes, can't you imagine the delight, after the brutes down here, of meeting eyes in an omnibus? Of a thigh pressed against yours? Of a foot that touches yours as if by accident? Of seeing a pretty shop girl go scarlet when you squeeze her hand as she hands you a parcel? A few ordinary words, a suggestion of meeting again, and then tea together somewhere, and later dinner and a night spent in love that leaves you shattered and sleepy and dreaming for days."
It seems horrible to me."
"That's because you are a man and don't know what love, really exquisite love, means. Very few men do. But when they do, they're divine."
"But did you not horrify them at first?"
"Never. We know one another in a flash. The most wonderful love I ever had was a girl of 19, the daughter of a peer. Oh, she had been to a good school, a finishing school. It finished her, I can tell you. I got to know her people. Oh, yes, I can be a gentlewoman when I like. And I took her away into the country for a week. I bet you she remembers it as I do. And then back to my brute. He'd have been after me otherwise. He thought I'd gone to get more money. And then there would have been hell and blackmail. So long as my money lasted, we lived in a fairly decent set of rooms, and we had a wonderful time. But, my God, he was a brute. He thrashed me sometimes. I loved it. And vicious. I don't want to make your hair stand on end. I'd read a lot of filthy books here and abroad, and I thought I knew what vice was. The things he did to me, and that he made me do. I tell you, the 5 cities of the plain rolled into one were a Trappist monastery compared to our flat. And his friends that he brought to me, and their animals. You people west of Chancery Lane can't dream what are the vices among the Lascars, Chinamen, Malays, half-breeds, Spanish-Americans, niggers, mulattoes of all kinds. One didn't know at the end of an orgy whether one was a girl or a boy or a beast. Lucky animals can't breed with humans."
A strange, bitter smile flickered over her lips.
"Now, my friend," she continued recklessly, "you know what you've saved. You've heard what they called me. Menagerie Sal."
Literally, my hair did stand on end. At least, I felt a cold contraction of the scalp, and my sight vacillated. "This is too horrible. How could you? Why did you stand it?"
"I liked it." "What?" "I don't want you to take home any illusions about a repentant sinner, and I paid for it. My God, I have paid for it. When my money was gone, I had quite a good deal, and it lasted a longish time. I sank, if one could sink below that, but one is always comparatively up when one can pay. I sank lower and lower. The most vicious of scum knew of me all over the world, and came to me like filings to a magnet. It was too late to get away. I was Menagerie Sal, the darling of the beasts, human and otherwise. And that's where I am now. I told you the truth just now when I said that no self-respecting whore would be seen speaking to me. And if any clean white man showed any signs of wanting me, they are all round me and on to him at once, telling him things mostly true. And what's more, none of them would go with a man if they knew he'd been with me. You know, there are grades of respectability, even among harlots. I'm afraid I'm shockingly mal vu in the oldest profession in the world, even as practised in Ratcliffe Highway. It is not often that I have enough to eat. I shouldn't be allowed in here if you hadn't brought me. Now you know why I'm going to kill myself. If I don't, one of the brutes will kill me some day. See this scar?" And she pulled her blouse away upon her shoulder. "That was done by a sort of gorilla. I was trying to get away from him. So I'm going to out it. Don't you think I'm right?"
I could not answer. I was paralyzed with horror, especially by the calm manner with which she spoke of these unspeakable atrocities. I harked back and repeated in an undertone, "You like it?" "Yes, sometimes. That's the truth. But I'm afraid of the end of it. Afraid." And she covered her face with her hands and shuddered. I sat looking at her, at last, as though she were a curious pathological case in a mental hospital. And then a horrible but irresistible thought came to my mind. The cheetah. I began, my heart beating violently, to feel my way. "What a life," I said. "But I confess you interest me dreadfully."
"Do I?"
she said suddenly, looking up.
"Aren't you disgusted?"
Then she gave a short laugh and said,
"I wonder. Well, I expect you'd be as bad as any of them if you had a chance, if the truth were only known."
"And suppose I were?"
"Oh, I shouldn't mind. I've been through too much. But I am surprised, you with your solemn, learned old air."
I thought rapidly, and then, to my eternal misery, I made up my mind. Such a chance could never occur again. I said, "Supposing I were a worn-out old rake with unnameable curiosities, jaded with all ordinary vices, and supposing I said to you, 'Come away from here, come and live in the country. I'll settle a sum of money upon you which will keep you from want in the event of my death. I am a scientist, a vicious one if you like. I should want to try all kinds of experiments on you. What would you say?'
I'd say, as the Yanks do, 'Put her there, governor.' You can't do anything worse to me than I've had done to me already, and I'd love to be away from all this mob. When do we start?"
We talked on for half an hour, and then I left her. She gave me an address to write to at a poste restante. A month later, she was installed in a cottage in the village where I then had my research laboratory. She had no desire to mix with the people of the place, but for the information of the public and the parson, she gave herself out to be a young widow. The name she adopted was Mrs. Clayton. Of course, it was immediately observed that she had come there at my instigation, and that when I was at the laboratory, she was constantly at my house. They drew their own, the inevitable, conclusions, but as I had steadily repelled any attempt on the part of the aborigines to establish social relations with me of any kind, this did not trouble us. Ursula Clayton left behind her in the parlous of the docks every trace of her professional career, accent, vocabulary, and manner. When my solicitor, who with my assistant Rex Magley will be trustee of my will, had proved to her that a certain income was settled upon her in any event, she abandoned all reserve with me. Hitherto our relations had been a trifle strained. She seemed unable to realize that I was determined to act in her permanent interest, and was not merely amusing myself with her for a time. She became a really delightful companion. I was a bachelor and never at any time an anchorite, and the society of Ursula Clayton was interesting, and satisfying in every respect. I gradually came to know her history, which, though it does not concern this narrative, is illuminating as an explanation of her abnormal sexuality. In the 80s of the last century, there are still people old enough to remember a hot wave of what are known as unnatural vices, almost openly and unblushingly practiced, swept over our English society. It was the outcome of the aesthetic craze intimately associated with the name of Oscar Wilde, who ultimately in the 90s paid for everyone and subsequently died overwhelmed with public infamy and the private admiration of the few. It became a matter of ordinary conversation to discuss homosexual love affairs of men and women prominent in society, especially of the latter. In a word, sodomy and lesbianism were, sub rosa, fashionable. Preeminent among the male perverts was a well-known peer of artistic taste and enormous wealth, at whose house in the country homosexualists of both sexes congregated, and where, as was averred, orgies took place that were spoken about with bated breath in the most fashionable boudoirs. Prominent in this society was a very high-born dame indeed, in whose hands or arms no woman was safe, and she formed the centre of a lesbian coterie, which spread like a rodent ulcer into almost every class of society. It was in the unnatural order of things that the masculinity of the lady and the femininity of the Lord X should bring them closely together. So closely, indeed, that, to the astonishment of the inverted world, Lady Z gave birth to a child who was christened Ursula. This child was sent abroad to be brought up in Italy. A respectable sum of money was settled for her maintenance and education, which became hers absolutely on attaining her majority. With such a heredity, it is not surprising that Ursula developed early a sexual precocity and désinvolture, which the settlement made upon her by her parents enabled her to gratify to the fullest extent of her inclination. She told me her early sexual history, which was amazing, but does not concern us, beyond what she told me in Ratcliffe Highway, and which I have already recorded. By the time she came to our village, her fires were burning low, her sexuality was to a great extent satiated, and she showed no trace in her manner or proclivities of the storms which had disturbed her youth. She was a charming companion, an intelligent and well-educated friend, and a charming mistress. And the cheetah? We called him Kumar. He settled down in our 2 houses as a great affectionate domestic pet. Sometimes in passage between the two, led on a chain by Ursula, he terrified the inhabitants of the village, human and animal, but this was very seldom, and the villagers had grown accustomed to what was known as the Professor's Zoo. The attachment between Kumar and Ursula became very close, and indeed I sometimes feared a precipitation of events, but Ursula was too keenly interested in my work to endanger the results by premature action. I conducted my experiment on the lines suggested by Milne Edwards. It was nothing to inoculate Kumar under a local anesthetic. He would never have dreamed of the possibility of being hurt by either of us. The day arrived when the blood tests were wholly satisfactory. The serum of the one accommodated the corpuscles of the other without any trace of hemolysis. And I left the rest to Ursula. I do not know what I expected to be the outcome of this experiment. It was impossible to anticipate. As a practicing surgeon, I was skilled in obstetrics, and had no fear for the result, only an intense curiosity. If I expected anything, it was a queer little monster, which I should allow to live long enough to be perfectly formed, and then prepare as a specimen, explaining its presence as an arrival from a native collector in India. At the end of only 6 months' anticipation, Ursula gave birth to one of the most perfectly formed little female children it has ever been my lot to look upon. She was remarkably furry, but newborn babies are often thus, and as in the case of this child, they lose it in a month or two. I should mention, though it is not material, that I took a house on the south coast for Ursula to await the event. I delivered her myself, and she brought the child whom we had registered as of illegitimate birth under another name, and had baptized Unica, the only apposite name, it seemed to me, back to our village. There could not be any question of destroying so perfect a little specimen of humanity, and when Ursula returned with her, she explained her, when necessary, as a foundling she had adopted from a workhouse on her travels. I will not try to set down here what were my thoughts as I read this frightful record. They are indescribable. It was all I could do to prevent myself burning the manuscript and taking 5 grains of morphine on the spot. But I dared not do it. I had to read on, though it was now broad daylight. The child grew in beauty and charm, developing with a rapidity which amazed me. When she was 2 years old, Ursula Clayton left her cottage and came to live in the house near Cosmopoli where she now inhabits. After the birth of Unica, I ceased my physiological experiments in this direction. I had been too successful, and dispersed my collection of animals. I was frankly terrified, and still am, at the success of my culminating effort. Unica is entirely human physically, but I constantly recognize the feline influence in little actions, tastes, in her whole mentality. What will happen when she grows up? When her sexual life begins? When puberty asserts itself? I tremble to think. One thing is abundantly manifest. She must never be allowed to marry. What response would she make to the Mendelian law? Her children? Would they be children? The thought turns me cold. The one thing I can think of is that as soon as she reaches puberty, she must be drastically operated upon. Ovariotomy, hysterectomy, the whole thing. But how explain the necessity? Would any surgeon in the world consent to spay, to sterilize a perfectly healthy, apparently normal and beautiful young girl? I doubt it very much. There is only one course to be pursued, but it is one which will shatter and ruin my life and Ursula's. So long as we two, and we alone, know the awful secret of Unica's birth, our minds may remain easy, and we can face the world with nothing more against us than the tittle-tattle of our neighbors, who may look upon Ursula as the faithful mistress of a faithful bachelor professor. Indeed, I often regret that I did not marry Ursula before I brought her to Cosmopoli. I should then have been able to keep closer watch over Unica, and carry out myself what I now set down. If any man ever desires to marry Unica, he must be told the whole truth. It will be a frightful thing to do, and it might have to be done over and over again. It would end by all coming out. But if, in spite of this stunning revelation, any man is bold enough to persist in his desire to marry her, he must be warned to take every possible and known precaution against having children by her. I may die before this happens, and then, God help her, this awful duty will devolve upon Ursula Clayton. It is with this in view that I have written out this manuscript, in all its revoking details, concealing nothing, glossing over nothing. Ursula shall do all she can to discourage suitors, but should one present himself persistently, he must be told. I have told him. Paul Barrowdale, August 19 blank. Following upon this apparent termination of his manuscript came another entry dated 10 years later. I reopened this record, which I ardently hoped I should never peruse again. But it is imperatively necessary. At the age of 11, Unica has passed the arrival of puberty and is a fully developed and very beautiful girl, having passed through a stage in which, though beautifully formed, she was a sallow, swarthy, repellent little girl. Her whole body is classically perfect, and as far as showing it to her mother and me is concerned, quite unashamed of her perfect nakedness. She is covered with the light peach-bloom down which makes many fair women so intensely attractive, but the down is a light tawny orange color, recalling the coat of poor Kumar, who died by my hand deeply as I regretted the necessity after her birth. The down is punctuated here and there at more or less regular intervals by small imperfect rings of a darker color, that of her normal hair, though not so dark, which to our instructed eyes recall vividly the markings of Kumar's coat. The only idiosyncrasy which she exhibits beyond this is the extraordinary luxuriance of her auxiliary and pubic hair, which is beautifully grown but phenomenal in such a young girl. She has another peculiarity which one cannot but recognize as hereditary. If she is unhappy, which is rare, or annoyed, which is rarer still, or if she is afflicted with any passing fit of childish naughtiness, all that is necessary is to insinuate our fingers into the thick curls under her arms and tickle and caress her like an animal. Her mood becomes serene at once. I hate to use the word, knowing what we do, but she positively purrs with contentment, and if the caress is gently prolonged, she goes fast asleep. The primary object of this postscriptum is, however, to call attention to what is really a very serious matter. It is that, at her times of periodic disturbance, which take place not monthly, but at intervals of 3 to 4 months, she is subject to what may rightly be called oestrum, a frenzy of sexual desire. Though she is technically quite ignorant of sexual matters, it appears in many ways her beauty is greatly enhanced. Her eyes become even finer than usual, her lips more crimson, and her nipples are in a constant state of erection and intense sensitiveness. She is restless and unsatisfied and wants to go out and mix with people for no reason that she is aware of. As a rule, she is self-contained and utterly indifferent to companionship, even to that of her mother. At these times, which are remarkably prolonged, often to a fortnight or 3 weeks, she must be very carefully watched. Above all things, she must not be allowed to get into contact with men. I am convinced, poor child, that it would be disastrous to her, and the terrible results I've hinted at in the record would almost certainly ensue. Ursula Clayton is alive to this, and I can rely upon her never to leave her alone in these circumstances. Her husband, should she ever have one, must also be warned of this danger. I have warned him. Paul Barrowdale, May 19 blank. It is as impossible for you who read this to imagine as it is for me to describe what I felt when I at last terminated the perusal of Barrowdale's manuscript. One amazing fact, one concerning which I had curiously enough evinced no curiosity, was that of her age. Comparing the dates of Barrowdale's record and its postscript, it became clear Unica was only 13 years old. It was broad day when I went up to our bedroom. Unica had not moved. She lay with her head resting on her right arm, which had drawn her nightdress free of her right breast, which stood up, inviting caress. I put my lips to it and closed them in a long kiss. The delicate, intoxicating perfume which I now could explain struck me more persistently than usual. Under my caress she awoke for a moment and said, "Oh, you darling, then it wasn't a dream. Go on," and so fell asleep in my arms, as she rolled over onto me and slept until the servant brought our morning tea. After breakfast, I told her I had worked until morning and must go for a long walk to get the cobwebs out of my head. She said, "All right, so long as you don't ask me to go with you. I shall curl up on the divan and think about my baby." I went out. Her baby. What would it be? Barrowdale and I had carried out a long series of Mendelian experiments. I could not blind myself to the probability, the inheritance of characteristics transmitted through the female line. That she would throw back, I shuddered at the thought, was practically a certainty, a foregone conclusion. There was nothing else for it. Abortion is a hideous word, but this child must not be born. It must be got rid of at once. She was almost 2 months pregnant already. I shuddered at the thought of what even a miscarriage might bring to light. I knew that I had a terrible task before me, but I had to face it. How terrible it was, I fortunately could not foresee, or what an effect my decision was to have upon both of us. I tried to prepare the way by calling upon the doctor whom I had had in mind as our family physician, a good worthy soul and thoroughly conversant, as a result of long practice with his job, which was to see people safely into and out of the world, instill common sense into their mothers in dealing with their childish ailments, and to comfort his adult patients by an assumption of knowledge of their cases which he was far from pretending, in ordinary conversation, to possess. I had been on terms of friendly social intercourse with him ever since my arrival in Cosmopoli, and I thought that I could count upon him to help me deal with my fearful problem with sympathy and tact. This was the one mistake that I have made throughout my trouble, a mistake which has rendered it necessary for me to be prepared for the worst, for scandal, for exposure, and possibly worse. I had not realized and appreciated, though I had perceived unmistakable indications of, the feeling that existed in Cosmopoli with regard to my abduction of Unica and the suicide of Ursula Clayton, which was, in the absence of any possible explanation, the direct result of my action. Dr. Fisher received me with a demeanor which was distant, severe, and almost embarrassed. But though I felt this in my bones, I persuaded myself that my condition of nervous strain led me to exaggerate the peculiar aloofness of his manner. I hastened to put our interview upon a semi-professional basis. "I want to have a word with you," I said, "about my wife." "Yes?" It should have been obvious to me that he was on his guard and had no intention of meeting me halfway. "She is very young, much younger indeed than I had any idea of when I married her. And yet you, as Barrodale's intimate friend, should have known. How old is she?" I passed this question by and said, "He never spoke to me of his relations with Mrs. Clayton. I only saw the child once before we met accidentally, and fell in love with one another." He shrugged his shoulders slightly and looked away out of the window. I ought to have seen that he did not believe me. "I am not satisfied about her health," I went on blindly. "I have reason to suspect an endometritis. Until this has been dealt with surgically, I feel that she ought not to bear children." He remained quite silent, and I proceeded. "I do not know whether she would readily submit to examination, but I should like you to make it." "You have reason to believe she is pregnant." It was a statement rather than a question. "Yes, and if I am right, I think the pregnancy should be avoided, for this time at least." He rose from his chair and walked to the window, where he remained silent for a moment or so, which seemed to me an eternity, and then turning round but not coming back to his seat, he said, "Professor Magley, I will be quite candid with you. You know, or should know if you do not, that there is a very strong feeling prevalent in this town with regard to your action in taking this young girl away from her mother, a feeling which was greatly exacerbated by the terrible sequel which your action brought about. It is not my intention or inclination to sit in judgment upon you. Your own conscience is probably dealing with the matter, and I do not envy you your reflections. But now you come to me, and in practically so many words you suggest that I should relieve you of immediate consequences and inconvenience by procuring abortion for you. Please understand me once and for all that I absolutely refuse to have any hand in the matter whatever. If your wife consults me, I shall do my utmost to protect her by any means in my power from any attempt of the kind. And before we either of us say anything more, which we might subsequently regret, I think it better that this interview should come to an end. I advise you to forget it, but bear in mind that I shall not." And he moved to the door, which he opened. I can only say that I slunk out. Well, I realized the colossal mistake I had made, and that if anything was to be done, I must depend solely upon myself, and upon Unica. That evening she was lying in my arms on the divan, and by the familiar resource of caressing her amid her wonderful auxiliary hair, I had got her into a condition of luxurious and almost passionate happiness. I opened the subject by saying, "Are you very keen to have this baby of yours?" "Indeed, yes. How can you ask it? Imagine what it will be." Alas, my imagination was only too active, too precise and too terrific. I went on. "I've been thinking, darling, that we are so intensely happy with one another that it seems a pity to put a stop to it by having a child at once. Would it not be better for both of us if we waited a little? Say a year, during which we can have one another all to ourselves. I am a little jealous of your baby just at present, though in a year or so—"
"What do you mean?"
she said, drawing a little away from me and looking at me, her beautiful eyes wide open, the pupils fully dilated.
"We haven't waited. The baby is here."
"Well, hardly," I replied, trying to convey an impression that we were merely discussing a possibility of no great importance. "These things are easily rectified, avoided. Remember, I am a surgeon as well as a doctor of medicine and of science. I could put you right without any difficulty or danger, and practically without discomfort or disturbance to yourself." She sprang to her feet.
"What do you mean?"
she repeated. "Oh, a very simple matter. A drug, perhaps, a very slight operation, and we should be as we were before, and could take our own time about having a child. This one, if it can be called a child yet, is, as it were, an unexpected, a premature accident." She stood looking at me, with an expression of savage loathing and horror. Her breasts heaved tumultuously, her lips parted, not in a smile, tumultuously, but in a ghastly rictus, showing her prominent little canine teeth in an evil, indescribable grin. Her fingers clawed at the joining of her wrapper, which she pulled free from her breast, as if to give herself air, and then she said in a voice I had never heard before, a kind of hissing growl,
"You propose to me to kill my baby?"
"Oh, don't put it like that. I only mean—"
You mean! Oh, you brute! You beast! You devil!"
"Darling!" I sprang up and advanced towards her. She flung out her hands, catching me on the chest with such force that I lost my balance and fell back on the divan. She took a step forward and stood over me.
"Don't touch me! Don't come near me! Never again, you murderer!"
And she fled from the room. I sprang up and followed her, but I was too late. She had gained our bedroom, slammed the door and locked it, and I heard her rush to the door of my dressing room and lock that also. "Darling, listen," I said as loud as I dared, on account of the servants, through the door. "It's all right. I didn't mean it. I promise not to speak of it again. Only come out, or let me in. I must speak to you. You have misunderstood me." I was in agony. After a few minutes, during which I implored her to open the door, I heard her say, still in the raucous voice which had filled me with horror downstairs,
"If I open the door for a moment and say something, will you promise me upon your honor as a man not to force your way into the room?"
There was no help for it. I promised. Then she opened the door. She had flung off her wrapper and stood, holding the door, clad only in a short crêpe de chine chemise, which had slipped down to her waist on one side, being held on the other by a shoulder ribbon. I had never seen her look so superb, and she said, hardly above a whisper,
"If you force your way in here tonight, I will tear you with my nails. I will bite you. Some way or other I will kill you. Perhaps tomorrow I may be able to bear to look at you. Now I must think. Leave me alone with my baby."
And she closed the door again and locked it. I went downstairs. The whole horror of the situation burst upon me. Unica had reverted to type. She was no longer a girl. She was a cheetah. The animal instinct, fiercely awakened in defense of her young, was aroused to its highest point. I did not attempt to blind myself to the fact. She had become dangerous. I foresaw a condition of things fraught with all the possibilities of appalling tragedy. To protect her unborn offspring, she was capable of anything, even of killing me. For a moment I wished she would. It would be a happy release for me. But afterwards? Regard being had to her parentage, it was impossible to tell how long she would carry her young within her. Would the period of gestation be human or feline? It depended, I felt, upon what was to be born. My scalp contracted with horror at the thought. One thing, and one thing only, was clear to me. I must not allow the monster I anticipated to see the light. I must be no party to the perpetuation of a race of hybrid monsters that might be frightful. And it came to this. I must take precautions that she did not kill me. I must kill her. And I loved her as no man has ever loved a woman before. Utterly, blindly, and even at that supremely awful moment I desired her beautiful body. I was thirsty to caress, to have her. I tried to sleep on the divan, worn out as I was, but sleep would not come. I tossed about all night, sometimes going out into the summer night to cool the fever which raged in every limb. I drank. I thought for a moment again of a hypodermic injection of morphia to dull my tortured senses, to forget for a while, but I feared what Unica might do if she found me insensible in her present mood. No, I must go through with it and keep my brain clear, my presence of mind at its highest pitch. Next day Unica came down after lunchtime. She recoiled when I would have taken her in my arms.
"Sit down,"
she said, fortunately in her natural low musical voice.
"I have something to say to you."
I sat down and waited. She paced up and down the room with a curious, soft, padding step. The cheetah was dominant. After a while she said,
"I have thought all night. I know what is in your mind. It's no use to try and reassure me. I have a new instinct, like an animal, a new knowledge, and I can protect myself and my baby. Until it is born, perhaps for always, I will never let you touch me or sleep with me again. I will never be off my guard in your presence. I will take no food which you have had the remotest chance of touching. I will live with you in broad daylight, unless I find it impossible. If I do, I will go away and live upon my annuity where you shall never find me. But you shall have your work to do here, and I don't want to ruin your career."
Poor child. She little knew how utterly it was ruined already. I hardly knew myself. It was no use protesting. Her instinct was infallible. For her, I was the enemy, seeking to destroy her and her baby. And it was true. Some weeks have passed since that awful night. As to my own position, I know that my university career is ended. I have only anticipated matters by intimating to the authorities that I retire from the professorship of physiology at the end of this term, and already they are looking for my successor. There are moments when a wave of her old love for me comes over her, and she allows me to caress her lightly, in broad daylight. At the slightest attempt on my part to become demonstratively affectionate, she withdraws herself, as cats do when they are bored with the attention of their human companions. I sleep in my dressing-room, where I have added interior bolts to the doors. It is a period of armed strain. But there are times when she allows me to raise one of her arms, and plays as of yore with her auxiliary curls. And at these times she is almost off her guard. If my hands wander to her lovely body, she comes to herself and flings me off. But it has given me the clue to the ultimate solution. Time is getting on, and I must act. I have a hypodermic filled with aconitine. One day, when she is hypnotized by the only caress she allows me, I shall thrust the needle among the roots of the hair under her arm. It will be instantaneous and undiscoverable. There will be a post-mortem, of course. If the opening of the uterus reveals what I fear, professional etiquette will keep knowledge of the discovery from the world. What I shall do then remains to be seen. I now know that Paul Barrowdale was... I cannot call him a coward, for I know what he bore through the long years, but I know that he inoculated himself with the pure culture of septic pneumonia, and died an apparently natural death. The scientific importance of the facts which have led to these multiple tragedies is too great for them to be utterly lost to future physiologists. I shall deposit this record with Blayre, our registrar, sealed up with instructions that it is not to be opened until 25 years after my death, when a new generation will have forgotten Rex Magley and the scandals which surrounded the closing months of his life. Note: more than 25, nearly 30, in fact, years have elapsed since Rex Magley deposited this manuscript with me. It was obvious when he deposited it that he was suffering from severe mental strain. I knew, of course, of the scandal which was busy with his name, and could not but approve of his determination to resign his chair in the university. He told me that he was shortly taking his wife abroad, and would look out for some place in the south or west of France, where they had spent their honeymoon, to settle down in. Within a week, returning from a dinner of one of the university societies, where he had ceased to be a welcome companion, he found his wife dead upon the divan in their sitting-room. At the inquest he informed the coroner that he had left her in apparently good health and spirits when he left the house early in the morning. 2 days later he was himself taken seriously ill. A virulent form of septic double pneumonia set in almost at once, and in 36 hours he was dead. All these tragic happenings formed the almost exclusive topic of conversation in the town and university for a few weeks, and then Magley, his wife, and Mrs. Clayton were forgotten. I have pondered deeply whether or not I should destroy this manuscript, and have more than once been on the point of doing so, but at the critical moment it has seemed to me that I have no right to destroy so astounding a record of research work in a most obscure field of knowledge. What I think I shall do will be to seal it up again, to be opened long after my death. One thing alone is fortunate, and that is that neither Paul Barrowdale nor Rex Magley left any ascertainable relations behind them. Barrowdale's fortune reverted under his will to the university. Magley's was escheated to the crown. Christopher Blayre. End of Section 10, and end of The Purple Sapphire and Other Posthumous Papers by Christopher Blayre. Read by Ben Tucker.